The GOP candidates minus the frontrunner debated last night in Iowa. To analyze the highlights, I'm joined by two experts. In New York with me is Julie Sheriel, Director of Government Research for Bloomberg Intelligence. And in Austin, Texas, I'm joined by Avik Roy, Opinion Editor with Forbes. Good to see you both with me. And let's start actually with this quick recap.
Donald Trump.
It's not about Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
You want to Trump.
I kind of miss Donald Trump.
All right, they were talking about Donald Trump. He wasn't there. Julie, was this a smart move on Trump's part? Did it hurt him or help him?
Yeah, I don't think it especially hurt him, certainly with his followers already. I think it actually could have helped him to the extent that the other frontrunners, Ted Cruz and probably Marco Rubio, didn't have a great night. Ted Cruz especially was under a lot of attack, and I think if Trump had been there, that might have not been so much the case.
Avik, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. On Fox News, after the debate concluded, Frank Luntz, who's a pollster, a Republican pollster, had a focus group that showed, I think, 27 people, and they felt that Rubio had a pretty strong night, and that the debate was actually better without Trump, and that it reflected poorly on Trump that he wasn't there. That Iowa voters want you to court them, they want you to show up. Now, that's obviously an anecdotal sample of 27 people, and it could very well be that Trump supporters continue to say he's their guy, and he's obviously made all the right moves thus far.
So, Avik, in your view, did anyone in particular gain ground or lose ground?
Well, you know, it's hard to say. I mean, you can watch a debate and score it like a boxing match and say somebody won points here, somebody lost points there, and it doesn't always translate in terms of what we see in the polls. And I think it's also important to remember that the Iowa caucus is a unique beast. You actually have to show up in these gathering spots and vote for the person that you support. And so it's not just enough to say to a person on the telephone, oh yeah, I support Donald Trump, or I support Rubio or Cruz or whoever. You actually have to show up there and spend all night there arguing for your candidate and then voting for him. So what we don't know is how many of the people who support Trump and support these other candidates will actually show up at the caucus and vote for their man.
Julie,
or woman.
Let me ask you your opinion on something that was brought up early on in the debate, and there were questions about who can best unify the party, and that there's a lot of divisions within the GOP. So do you have a sense on who that candidate is? Is it Donald Trump, because he's the front runner, or is it somebody else that might actually play to all those various proponents within the GOP?
Yes, it's going to be the candidate that rises in the elections, right, in the primaries. So as we start to see actually see what happens in Iowa, see what happens in New Hampshire, I think you'll start to see the party coalesce around the candidate who does especially well. I think everyone is still waiting to just see how this is going to play out. Are the polls right? Will people show up to vote? But I do think that the party, for its own good, will coalesce around the candidate that seems to have the most momentum.
Avik, do you think at this point it's still a bit of a wild card in the race?
Actually, I think the race has been reasonably stable at the top. I think the top 3 or 4 have been reasonably stable. I think where you're seeing a lot of volatility is specifically in the early state of New Hampshire, where behind Trump, who's been consistently leading, there's been a lot of moving around in the polls in terms of who's second and who's third. I think Iowa and New Hampshire are both going to be actually very important, particularly New Hampshire, because New Hampshire will call the field. There are, 13 people still running. I think a number of them will drop out after New Hampshire, and I think that is going to help us clarify who has the staying power and who will consolidate, let's say, the somewhat conservative voters, the more moderate voters, the more mainstream Republicans. Henry Olsen, who's at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, describes the 4 factions within the Republican Party and likes to talk about the issue of uniting Republicans in that way. And you can see that Trump is getting these blue-collar, Democratic-leaning voters. Cruz is getting the Tea Party voters and, to a large degree, the evangelicals. But the sort of mainstream conservatives, the mainstream Republicans, and the more moderate voters, broadly speaking, are still up for grabs or being contested by a number of different candidates. So in New Hampshire, if the polls consolidate around someone who's in 3rd or 4th, I think you'd see the 5th, 6th, 7th place people maybe drop out. And then going forward, we're going to have a much more focused contest.
All right, let's talk about the focus last night in terms of issues. We heard a lot, Julie, about immigration. We heard a lot about ISIS. Do voters have enough knowledge about how these candidates stand on all the important issues, things like the economy, for instance?
I don't think they do. You know, I thought if I were to have one criticism last night is that I haven't heard any new ideas, right? We've heard a lot about the same old go after ISIS, immigration, anti-citizenship, and amnesty, a lot of the same kinds of themes that we've been hearing. Repeal Obamacare. I didn't hear any new ideas. And when we think about the importance in this election of voters getting out to actually vote, regardless of what the polls say, I think you need some exciting new ideas within the Republican Party to get them out there. You know, the country, what's on people's minds are things like wages, right? The lack of wage inflation that we've been experiencing, job growth, taxes, a lot of these issues that I think people would like to hear about. You haven't really heard any new ideas. Energy independence is a great one for the Republican Party. We haven't really heard much about energy policy. And I think the lack of big ideas is a risk for the party to get out the vote.
Interesting. Avik, why aren't we hearing some of these issues that, as Julie points out, are very important for voters as they consider the future of the country?
Yeah, so I can tell you that that's not the candidates' fault. The candidates, if you go to their websites and if you follow the debates and the campaign closely, have been putting out tons of white papers, some candidates more than others. So Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Chris Christie in particular have been putting out a lot of policy papers talking about what they would do on just those issues. The problem has been that the moderators in the debates have not ask those questions, because what they've been looking for is the conflict that will drive entertainment value perhaps in the debate. So you hear a lot about immigration where there's a lot of disagreement among the Republicans as to what to do, whereas, you know, talking about things like wage inflation, it just doesn't, I guess they calculate that it doesn't attract the ratings, and so they don't talk about it that much. But I would say the candidates themselves have been putting out these kinds of plans, and the media has not been broadcasting that broader discussion about policy, because the media has been more interested in the conflict. But again, the candidates have definitely, or at least some of the candidates, have been putting out quite a bit of policy content. It's just not getting through the filter.
Well, they have other access, right? Social media and things. They can get their messages out, and certainly.
And they are.
Yeah,
and
I
they
don't
are.
think it's so much that they don't have the message, that they don't have the platform, and you can go and find it on their websites as they love to advertise. And certainly the moderators of the debates don't always necessarily want to get into the more nuts and bolts kinds of issues. My concern is more that there aren't new ideas. There are plenty of ideas, but there are a lot of the same ideas.
And they're debating the same ideas.
And they're debating the same thing over and over again. They all have very detailed tax plans, but they're essentially, there's either the flat tax or there's you know, cut all corporate taxes and individual tax rates. There aren't really new ideas that would make start of a fresh Republican Party and get people motivated and inspired. There are a lot of the same ideas.
All right, Avik, let's turn to you as we wrap things up here. If you could give these candidates some advice that they would actually listen to and act on, what do you want to see from who during what period here as we head toward the crucial Iowa, New Hampshire contest that we'll see? Who needs to do what between now and then?
Well, I mean, in the short term, it's really more about, it's not about what they say on TV as much as it is grassroots campaigning, get out the vote efforts, get your people out to the caucuses. So it's much more operational than it is thematic. But I would say this, I think that what's most important for the Republican Party and for the candidate who ends up being the flag bearer for the Republican Party is to be able to express how free market principles and conservative principles will make life better for every American, rich or poor, white, black or brown, of every background, every religion. I think that's a message that some of the candidates have emphasized more than others. But I think if the Republican Party and the conservative movement want to be the majority party in this country and the governing party in this country, it's extremely important to express how conservatism can make life better for everyone.
And Julie, final thoughts from you.
I would think that, I'll come back to my theme about big ideas, right? Saying something new that people haven't heard before. I think, you know, the hope and change kind of message has worked quite well. It hasn't really worked so well this time. I don't think it's so much that people are angry and Donald Trump is appealing to the anger. I think it's that Donald Trump actually has new ideas. Now, you can debate the value of those ideas, but he has new ideas, and I think that's what's motivated people. So I like to see some of the other candidates come up with something a little bit more creative, something that's going to drive people to get excited about voting for that party again.
Well, I want to thank you both for your expertise, Julie Sheriel and Avik Roy. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Rhonda Schaffler for The Street.